Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, Three Queens Cuisine. I have for you today a little something different. We're going to be making easy homemade glazed donut holes. I'm going to be going over the difference between these kind of donuts, which are a cake donut, and there's another kind of donut out there that's called a yeast donut. So there's two different processes to cooking these, to making them. This one's a lot quicker than making a yeast donut, which requires anywhere from 2 to 3 hours for rising in between. This uses a different leavening agent than yeast to help the donuts puff up. So it's a bit of a quicker recipe. It's something that's more of a cake donut, so it's a little bit of a different texture, but it's easy, it's quick, and it's great to make at home, to make yourself a little treat when you want. As you can see, there's two different lists of ingredients. One, we're going to do the actual glaze on the outside, which is going to be confectioner's sugar, milk, and vanilla. Vanilla is mostly just for flavoring. And then it's the actual recipe for making the donuts, which is going to be a little bit more involved, but it's going to be quick, it's going to be easy to make, and I'm going to show you guys how to make both. I'm also going to show you guys, if you don't want to make it with the glaze, if you've tried it and you're not a huge fan of it, I'm also going to show you how you can just make a simple powdered donut just by using the confectioner sugar without any milk or vanilla. So you'll have that as an option as well, or you can even leave them plain. So the first thing we're going to start with is we're going to make our glaze. So the recipe calls for 1.5 cups of confectioner sugar. So this is what confectioner looks like. It's more of like a powder than it is a granule. So this calls for 1.5 cups, so I'm using 3 of the half-cup measurements. You're going to want to try and get it as level as you can, because once you add the liquid, the confectioner sugar is going to become more of a cream and absorb the liquid. So too much powder. You're going to want to try and make the measurements as level as possible, due to when you mix the liquid in with the powdered sugar, the confectioner sugar, it's going to absorb the liquid. So too much powder, your glaze will be very, very thick. Not enough, your glaze will be very, very thin. So we have our 1.5 cups of confectioner sugar, and now we're going to add 3.5 tablespoons of whole milk. So your tablespoon measurement is going to be your largest one. If you have a little collection like I do, you're going to go for the last one. That's going to be 3.5 tablespoons. This is another time you're going to want to try and be as accurate as you can to make sure that you don't overflow with the milk, because then your glaze may come out too thin. You can see how it's already starting to absorb it. So this is why you need to be accurate. 1/2 tablespoon is the one right before the large tablespoon, so we're going to use that. For our vanilla, we're using a teaspoon. We're using 2 teaspoons, but this one's going to be right before our half and our full tablespoon. This one is also a liquid, so trying to be as accurate as you can will help to make sure that the glaze is not too thin. All the ingredients together for our glaze, we're just going to whisk it together. Notice it's going to be a little thick, but that's okay, because as you mix the liquid in, it's going to thin out. There shouldn't be any lumps, and we're going to get a nice, smooth, even glaze. So for this recipe, the vanilla that I used is a darker vanilla extract. It will come out a little tinted when you use something like that, so if you don't want it to have any sort of coloring or tinting, you can use the white vanilla, which is a clear vanilla, so it won't change the color of the glaze at all. You'll still have a white glaze. This one might be a bit more beige, depending on how much vanilla you want to make, if you double the recipe or not. So now that we've mixed everything, this is your glaze. So see how it's nice and thin. There's no lumps in there. The confectioner sugar has completely dissolved in the milk and the vanilla mixture. So we're going to set that aside so we can start working on the actual cake donut. Okay, we have our wet ingredients combined. We're going to put that off to the side so we can start working on our dry ingredients. Before we start mixing any of our ingredients together, the first thing that we're going to do is start heating our oil. So when everything is ready to go, we can start frying right away. Cake recipes call for their ingredients to be handled this way, where you have the wet ingredients and then the dry ingredients. That's to help everything get combined and to help prevent flour clumping together or any of the ingredients getting clumped together. So we're going to follow the recipe that way because this is almost like baking, so certain things need to be precise. 2 bowls out for this very reason. This is going to be our bigger bowl where we have all the flour and the other ingredients, and then that's where the liquid's going to be mixed into. And then this is where we're going to put our milk and egg separately so we can combine everything in the big bowl later. This ingredient is 2 cups of flour. This is another time you want to try and make it as accurate as possible. So we're going to try and make that as flat as we can, okay? That's one. And we're gonna work on the other one. Next ingredient is 2 tablespoons of sugar. So that's our large measuring spoon, and we're gonna use 2 of these. Again, you're gonna wanna try, make it as even and flat as you can. You don't want it to be too sweet because you do have the sugar in the glaze. So try to make it flat and even, and that's 2. Going to be our leavening agent. Instead of doing a yeast donut, which would have yeast in it, we're doing a cake. So this is going to turn out a little differently, but this is going to help it when it cooks to puff up. Do 4.5 teaspoons, so that's right before our 1/2 tablespoon. So we're going to do 4 of these and then a 1/2. And you're going to want to try get it as flat as you can. So when you add it, the next one, what you can do is use the side of the container. There's like a little lip right there. You can use that by putting it there, scraping it off the top, and you get a flat one. So you can use the container to help you flatten out your teaspoons. There are 4, and then this is going to be our 1/2 teaspoon. Same thing. Keep it as flat as you can so we get an accurate measuring. This calls also for a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Salt is necessary in baking because it actually helps bring out the flavors, it brings out that sweetness, it brings just that little kick of what you need. Don't want to go too heavy on the salt. Try to get it as flat as you can. You can also use your finger and try to get that as flat as you can so you don't put too much salt into the recipe, otherwise you'll have a very, very salty donut. This is a recipe that you can make even though you may not have the butter melted. What you can do is on the recipe it shows that 1/4 of a cup is 1/2 a stick, so you measure it out 1, 2, 3, 4. There's usually 8 in here, so you cut that down the middle like that. Throw the 1/2 in the microwave in a small bowl to help melt it, and that way when you mix it, it'll cool off and be that liquid. You have to read some recipes carefully because some will say softened butter and not melted butter, which means room temperature, it's squishy. You know, you're able to manipulate it however you want, whereas melted is the liquid form. So make sure you read the recipes carefully. You have to read some recipes carefully because some will say softened butter and not melted butter, which means room temperature, it's squishy. You know, you're able to manipulate it however you want, whereas melted is the liquid form. So make sure you read the recipes carefully. So the butter is mostly melted. I don't want to accidentally burn it, so I'm going to use whatever residual heat is in the melted part of the butter to finish melting whatever little bits might still be not as melted. Okay, our butter is melted and now we can add it to our dry ingredients. Before we add our wet ingredients in, we're going to stir our dry ingredients together. Make sure they're blended. Make sure there's no large lumps in anywhere. And if it seems to be okay, what we're going to do first is we're going to take our egg and milk mixture. What we can do it as, so to make sure that you don't get one large lump, is slowly add it into the dry ingredients while you're whisking. This way it's evenly distributed and you don't have to worry about it turning into a big mess. There is raw egg in this part, so if your butter is too hot, you may want to give it time to cool off just a little bit so you don't accidentally cook the egg at all. So we're going to try and avoid that by just, again, slowly adding it around the batter, letting it cool off at the same time. But if you have cooked it to the point where it's thoroughly melted and it's still too hot, give it a little bit to cool off before you add it, otherwise you will cook your egg. So no, you didn't do anything wrong. It is a cake donut, but it's not going to be thin like a cake batter. It's going to be thicker because of the flour, because of all the other ingredients, the dry ingredients, the wet ingredients. So we're going to let this sit just for a little bit, and then we're going to start shaping and frying our donuts. The recipe calls for a small ice cream scooper to help you form the donuts. Sometimes I find that can make them a little too dense and they don't cook as nicely. So what we can use are 2 spoons. And in order to stop everything from sticking to it, use a little bit of non-stick spray. There is butter in the batter, but just in case if it gets a little sticky, spray some oil on your spoons so when you shape your donuts, they move easily. See? They don't even stick because they're greased. So that way you can shape them and then we can start frying. So we've shaped our first donut. The oil has been on low, heating up, and we're going to check and see if it's ready to go. So if you're not sure if your oil is ready or not, take a small amount of dough, put it in the oil. If it drops in, starts to bubble and floats to the top, your oil is hot enough. If it just kind of sits at the bottom and doesn't really do anything, that's going to mean that your oil is not ready, and then the cake donuts can become too oily. So you want to make sure that you wait until your oil is ready and hot. Okay, we're going to take our first donut, we're going to drop it in. Now be careful, because if you drop it from too high of an area, it will splash you and the oil is hot. So be careful doing this part. Try to make sure you somewhat dip it into the oil so it comes out. After you're done shaping the donut, you can still use the spoons actually to get it into the pan. Just simply after you're done shaping it, put one behind the other, like so, and just slide it off into the oil. So you can still use both spoons to help you get it into the oil. You can also use your spoons to help you shape it. If you want it to be more round and not so oval, use your spoons to help you shape it into more of a round shape. So just use the tips to guide it off. Keep guiding it that way, and you get more of a round donut instead of something a little bit more oval. Put too much dough on your spoon and try to shape it. That's going to be very, very dense. That's going to take longer for the inside to be cooked than the outside, and you might end up with a bit more of a burnt outside of a donut than an actual nice cake soft donut. Our oil is done preheating. I'm not going to pump up the heat. I'm going to leave it on a low setting, because if you overheat them, they will burn. So we're going to do that where we do more of a slow fry with them. So don't turn up the heat, leave it on the lower setting. We don't want to crowd our pan either, which means you put too many in there for the oil to be able to keep its temperature. The temperature will then drop and you won't get even frying. So don't crowd your pan, and try to make sure that you leave the heat on a lower setting. While you're frying, if it seems like your oil is not frying them as well, when you're finished with that batch, let the oil heat up a little bit again in between. Don't put any in right away. Give it some time to heat up, and then you can add the next batch of donuts in. You can see the underneath is starting to brown more. So we're gonna grab a pair of combs. You can use whatever you like to turn them, not your fingers. It's very hot. We're just gonna turn it softly. It might be a little hard to turn just because it is poofing. So give it a minute, it'll sit, it'll settle, and that's what you want. You want a nice, light golden color on them. So that way, when you have them inside, when you have the inside, they'll be nice and soft and fluffy. That's what we want. So we have one that is done completely, right? So what we're going to do is, because we used oil to fry this, we don't want to just let it sit. So I have a baking tray that I lined with paper towels. We're going to set those down, let them drain a little bit, but while they're still warm, we'll start glazing them. So I popped one open, still steaming. You can see the inside, how soft it is. The outside is a little crunchy, so that's what we want. We have a little bit of a crunch, and then we want that soft cake interior. So these came out perfect. So we want to make sure that they're brown on the outside, but you're still nice and soft on the inside. So we're going to take some of our donuts that are slightly cooled off. Make sure they're manageable by hand. They've just come out. Don't touch them just yet. So let's start with our Fuse 6. So we're going to take just a small amount of our icing that we've made. You want to be careful, not too much. Just going to put a little bit on. Okay, there we go. And then you can use a spatula, your hands. If you want to shuffle the bowl around, you can, but that's going to fall. But you just kind of toss them around in the glaze, so that way they get evenly coated without being overly glazed too. You want to make sure you have enough glaze for all your donuts if you are going to glaze all of them, but then this way you let them sit and that glaze will harden up. So if you don't want the glaze on the donuts and you want to try something different, take some of the confectioner sugar, sprinkle some on. And what you can make are your powdered donuts. Just give them a small toss around. Should be high enough for them to stick. You can leave them in there, so that way they kind of keep absorbing it. As you can see, from whatever little bit of oil is left on there and the heat, it helps to make it stick a little bit. So now you can do powdered donuts, or you can do the glazed donut. So that's two that you can make with the same recipe. So now the glaze has hardened. You can kind of see it on the outside. So now you can eat them, enjoy them, share them with family and friends, and make this for any kind of occasion that you want, or even just for kind of a day where you want something sweet. You can make these. So if one side looks a little too light, but the other side is just a little bit darker, that's okay. There's going to be residual heat that's going to stay in there while it sits. It will finish cooking it. It'll brown up a little bit more. Don't leave it in the fryer for too long, because otherwise it will burn the outside. Decide to make the donuts smaller than the donut holes, or like the pop-ums almost. If you decide to go a little smaller, you can use this. This is called a spider. So this way you can scoop multiple out, let it drain a little bit on the side, and then pop them off. So if you want to get one of these, this is great for frying. So this is something that you can look into if you want to, and this is great for when you're frying chicken, you're doing chicken nuggets, doing these kind of donuts, doing a whole bunch of things when frying. It's definitely something to look into. It might be called something else, but I've always known it as a spider. So that's something to look into if you want.